So if you're looking for 2023 wrap-up videos, I haven't done those yet. I will be doing a video of my favorites that I read from last year. Not quite a top 10 list, it's a little bigger than that. And then at the end of January, look out for the 3rd annual Red Fury Book Awards. 3rd time I've done this. I get to put the tuxedo on, put the green screen up, and have a little bit of fun. Give out some awards for my favorite books that I read in 2023. So, eyes peeled for that. But today, we're just going to talk about the 8 books that I read in December 2023. Oh, hey everyone, and welcome to my December book roundup. I'm going to share with you short reviews and ratings for the 8 books that I read this month. As I read a wide variety of genres, I will group them by genre and put chapters below, so if you want to skip around, feel free to do so. Just make sure you pop back and check out the book of the month, because it's one that I think has a lot of universal appeal that I think a lot of people would enjoy. Let's start with a biography. Johannes Brahms, a biography by Jan Swafford. So Johannes Brahms is one of my favorite composers, and in the 19th century, he kind of was handed the mantle of Bach, Beethoven, Brahms, and had to kind of live up to those predictions of his life. This is a very great biography because Brahms did everything he could to ensure that future posterity wouldn't be able to write a book like this, because he did a lot of things to kind of thwart future biographers. He destroyed a lot of his sketches of music. He destroyed anything that hadn't been published that was written by him. He destroyed all the correspondence, all the letters that were written to him, and even went so far as requesting letters back that he had written to other individuals, because he wanted his legacy to be his music, and it certainly was. But I'm still thankful that Jan Swafford put in all the legwork to write this biography, because I think this is a very good portrait of Johannes Brahms, the man. This, of course, was a very tortured soul. He was unfortunate enough to fall in love with his mentor's wife, and it was a love that could not be, and it affected his entire life. But he became one of the best composers we've ever seen. I was excited to read this book because Jan Swafford wrote a Beethoven biography that I read called Anguish and Triumph, which, although it's not my favorite biography of Beethoven that I've read, it is the most complete. And I felt if anybody could kind of figure out who Brahms the person was and bring it to the page, I thought it would be Jan Swafford, and I think he did a really good job in this book. I will say there are times that it reads a little dry, and it may not be for just the casual person that wants to read a good biography, but if you're really interested in this composer, I can definitely recommend Johannes Brahms, a biography by Jan Swafford. I gave it 5 stars. Let's go next to a work of science fiction, and this is Arc of Ascension by Michael R. Schultheis. Now, this is advertised as a space opera, but I felt this was more of like a sci-fi thriller, because this starts with a chase scene, and it never lets you go. It's very, very high-paced, a lot of great action sequences in here that Schultheis writes very, very well, and I really enjoyed this. This is a book that is set in a far future, not really on Earth, but far future universe. And there are a lot of different worlds, and there's a lot of different things going on amongst these worlds. And we're faced with a character named Alana, and she's kind of a bounty hunter. And she ends up taking this job that has links to her family. So she goes back to the planet that she's from to find out what's going on. In particular, her sister's in trouble, and she wants to save her sister from some events that are happening. I don't want to give away spoilers with this. But it's very, very high octane, very high-paced, fast-paced. But Schultheis does take quite a bit of time here and there to slow things down and give you good character beats for Alana and some of the minor characters. If there's one thing that I was wanting more of out of this book, I felt that just as Schultheis slowed down the action at times to give you good character development, I wanted more of that of the world. I mean, this is a pretty short book. It's about 200 pages, and I felt that he could have easily spent 20 or 30 more pages fleshing out the world, especially because there's some very interesting things that have to do with kind of religion versus science in here. And I'm always intrigued when authors kind of sets, even if it's not necessarily on Earth, but our universe in the future, just what kind of faiths are present. And I'm always curious about that. And I feel that it's present in the history and lore of this book, that he just didn't flesh it out on the page. It seems like he would introduce a concept or a group of people or a culture and explain it in a couple sentences and then move on. Whereas I would have liked maybe a few more paragraphs, things like that. But this is the first in a series, so perhaps he'll do more of that in future installments, flesh out the universe a bit more, maybe give it more of that space opera type of feel. But I enjoyed Arc of Ascension. I eagerly await the second book. I want to see what Alana does next in the next book. And I gave Arc of Ascension by Michael R. Schulteis a 3.5 out of 5. Up next, let's talk about a work of crime fiction that I listened to on audio, and that is The Hard Way by Lee Child. This is the 10th of the Jack Reacher books. And this kind of highlights everything good and bad about the Jack Reacher stories. Obviously, I like them a lot, or I wouldn't be continuing at number 10 and have plans on reading number 11 at some point as well. I will say some of the best things about this. Reacher as a character is great. He's just the Superman in these stories, and he's very competent and gets the job done, and he's just a very compelling protagonist. The other thing is Child is a master of plotting. Most great authors of crime fiction are master plotters, and Lee Child certainly is, because this was about a 400, 500-page book that just flew by, and just one scene after another just naturally flowed. He did such a great job with that. Two things that I feel detracted from this when I say kind of the good and the bad of the Jack Reacher stories. Kind of the bad is he has a tendency, the author has a tendency to sometimes just start a book with a plot convenience. Because he has an idea of a book and then he doesn't really take a lot of time to start it. In the case of this one, Reacher happens to be at a coffee shop and the crime is committed. And then the next day he happens to be at the coffee shop, same coffee shop where the crime is committed. And the people investigating the crime just happen to meet him and just happen to hire him to help investigate. And it's just very convenient. Besides that, once the story got going, it was great. The other side of this is sometimes Jack Reacher can be a Mary Sue or a Gary Sue, whatever you want to call it. And I felt that Lee Child was aware of that in this book, because it felt like he was just very conscious addressing that to the reader. Because there were a couple times where Reacher's like, made a mistake. He's like, oh God, I made a mistake. I'm horrible. And then, of course, the very next scene, he's back to being Superman. So that didn't work real well for me. But overall, this one's great. The ending's fantastic. It's one of the stronger finishes of these Jack Reacher books. This was probably going to be just like a 3 out of 5 for me, but the finish bumped it up a little bit, because in addition to being just a great finish, he gave you a bit of closure for a lot of the secondary characters. And Child doesn't do that a lot in these Jack Reacher books. He just kind of ends it, and then Jack Reacher kind of goes off in the sunset. But this one gave you a little bit more closure for the other characters, so I did appreciate that. So overall, I did enjoy The Hard Way. I won't do any more audiobooks. I'm not enamored by the audio narrator, but I will definitely read more of the Jack Reacher books. I gave The Hard Way by Lee Child a 3.5 out of 5. Up next is a short story collection by one of my favorite authors, Haruki Murakami. And this is After the Quake, and these are very thin. There's just 6 in this story collection. And they're loosely linked by an earthquake that happened in Kobe in Japan. And like a lot of Murakami, for Murakami, I'm very hot and cold on his short stories. So like 4 of these were pretty cold, and then 2 of them were magnificent. So it's kind of hard to rate him overall as a short story writer. I think one of the reasons that I don't always connect with his short stories is Murakami's style is kind of laid back, and it kind of just, the story works into you. And then the problem with some of these short stories is by the time you finally see where it's going and you're comfortable in the setting, like 2 pages later, it's over. So it doesn't always work in the short form for me. But when it does, it's fantastic. The last 2 stories in this collection are fantastic. One is a magical realism story of a super frog that saves Tokyo, and I think that's the title of the story. Very, very good, and it's typical Murakami, just throwing some things together that don't feel like they should work, and they work brilliantly. And then the last story in this collection had some fantastic character development. It was really reminding me of Norwegian Wood, which is one of my favorites by Murakami. And that one doesn't have magical realism elements, but is just fantastic work with great characters that you really care about. And in this last book of this collection, that's how I felt. I really cared about the characters at the end. So kind of an up and down collection, but I can still recommend it. If you haven't read Murakami, this might be a good short story collection to go into just because it is so short. I do have 2 more short story collections, since I am reading more short stories, that I'll probably get to later this year, by Murakami, I should say. But After the Quake, I gave a 3.5 out of 5. Let's go next to another short story collection. I mentioned that I was reading more short stories the last year and a half or so. What I've been doing is every time I finish a novel, I read a short story. So I always have a short story collection going. And I picked up one from my youth, and I'm glad I did. And this is The Magic of Kryn, which is volume 2 of the Dragonlance Tales. And I read these in high school, and I really enjoyed the Dragonlance world quite a bit in high school. It was, of course, produced by the same people that published Dungeons and Dragons, and I enjoyed that tie-in. And these are 10 short stories that work really well in this universe, and they take place a lot of different times. Some of them are before the Dragonlance Chronicles, some of them are during the 2 big series, Chronicles and Legends, and some of them are later. The crown jewel, of course, is a novella by Margaret Weis and Tracy Hickman in here that's very good. But Weis has her own short story in here that's very good. There's another one by Richard A. Knack that I absolutely adored. And overall, it was a pretty strong collection of short stories. I don't know if this would appeal to people that haven't read the Dragonlance Chronicles or Legends, but if you have, don't sleep on these short story collections, at least this one. The Magic of Kryn, Dragonlance Tales Volume 1, I gave a 4 out of 5. Let's go next to a book that made me say, finally! That is Grave Peril by Jim Butcher, the 3rd book of the Dresden Files. When I say finally, I finally see the appeal of this series. Like most people, when you tackle the Dresden Files, the first book was good. I think I gave it a 3 out of 5. But my exact words when I did a review of that book was something along the lines of, this is a great mystery story for people who don't read mysteries. Because that's what I felt. It was so predictable. He used all of the mystery tropes and just threw it in a fantastical world. But I really liked the world-building elements. I was curious to read on. So I read the 2nd book, which most people universally say is the worst book in the entire Dresden Files. Gave that one 2 out of 5. Well, we're up to 4 out of 5 with Grave Peril because this one was great. What I like most about this is it wasn't predictable because so many of the elements of this kind of crime fiction / urban fantasy type story, a lot of the plot elements and the plot turns were a result of the world building, which was fantastic. I mean, there were ghouls and fairies and vampires, and it was just very interesting learning about kind of this world within a world, even though it's set in modern day Chicago. And finally, I read a Dresden book where I was excited to continue the series. And I am actually continuing the series right now with the next book. I am going forward with a little bit of trepidation. Jake Bishop assures me that this is a false peak, that it's going to dip a little bit before they're all really, really great as we get kind of caught up in this series. But just knowing that the potential for a really great book is there has me excited about this series. So I gave Grave Peril by Jim Butcher, the 3rd book of the Dresden Files, a 4 out of 5. Let's talk next about my latest Guy Gavriel Kay book that I read, and that is River of Stars. And this was a very interesting read for me because this is the first one that I thought was not going to be a 5-star read. And then Kay just stuck the landing. So what's interesting about this one initially is this is set in the same world as Under Heaven, but it's set about 250 years later. And what I found intriguing throughout the story is that the readers of Under Heaven know more about what happened in that story than the people in the world, because the lack of the written word and history is passed down orally, and you don't know what is fact and what is legend and things like that. But let me talk, I'm kind of rambling a little bit. Indeed, I was rambling. I talked for about 10 minutes about River of Stars, so this is chopped up, my apologies. Let me talk about this initially, why it wasn't working for me. I was used to Under Heaven, where we had kind of a main protagonist. Even though he didn't have all of the point of view chapters, he had a vast majority of it. In River of Stars, we had kind of 2 very interesting protagonists here, and you barely saw them. So the storytelling was quite disjunct, but what Kay was doing was kind of setting up on the entire continent what was going on. And then it got more focused towards the end. And because of that, I just felt a greater richness in the world. And for me, that's one of the greatest things about Guy Gavriel Kay's books is just the sheer world building is some of the best I've read, full stop. So even though initially I wasn't loving the way the story unfolded, when it eventually went where it went, and then when Kay just absolutely stuck the landing, I just said, okay, I just had to trust the author here at the beginning. And I wish I had. If you do find yourself reading River of Stars, go in with kind of different expectations than I had. And I think you'll probably love it from beginning to end because the writing is solid, the characterization is solid, the world building, plotting. I mean, the guy can do no wrong that I've seen so far. Fourth book by Guy Gavriel Kay that I've read, and the fourth one, 5 stars. River of Stars by Guy Gavriel Kay. All right, my book of the month is Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. Now, this is the 5th book that Kuang has written, and it's the 5th one I've read. The first 4 books that I've read, the 3 books of the Poppy War and Babel, or Babel, I never know how to say it, I felt that Kuang was very good at theme, but not very good at character. And I just kept waiting for her to really nail a book, and I feel that this is the one. So this is, I don't know what I'll put it in the chapters, but I consider this a literary thriller because there are a lot of literary elements to it, but it's also a very fast-paced thrill ride in many ways. Not like action sequences, but when you get into this book and see what it's about, it's very thrilling from chapter to chapter, the storyline that R.F. Kuang takes you. So Yellowface, if you don't know what Yellowface is the term of cultural appropriation or racial appropriation of normally a white person taking a persona of someone of Asian descent. And in this story, we have 2 authors. We have one named Athena and one named Juniper. Athena is Asian. Juniper, it's actually her middle name, is white. And the 2 authors are having very different career paths. Athena Liu is kind of a publisher's darling, and she's become this fantastic author, best-selling author, award-winning author, and her friend is just kind of middling through things and not having a whole lot of success. Well, Athena passes away unexpectedly, and Juniper takes her manuscript that nobody's seen, rewrites a few things, and then publishes it as her own. And of course, it's a manuscript that's also about ancient China, so there's a lot of things in there as well, thematically, that are very interesting. One thing I really liked about this book is I felt that Kuang just took the gloves off and kind of attacked an institution that she's been very successful, and that is modern day publishing. And she has some scathing commentary on literary critics, publishing houses themselves, agents, and just the whole process of publishing. It's very, very interesting that she just kind of takes that approach, because in many ways, Athena Liu is a kind of a stand-in for her in this book, because she is a literary darling. Everybody loves her, and I think there's great reasons. I think this is a fantastic book. Obviously, it's my book of the month. But for her to kind of bite the hand that feeds her a little bit, I found pretty brave. And what's interesting in this book is just where the story goes. It takes you into so many thought-provoking ideas about not just the Yellowface component of this, which is at the forefront, and not just the publishing component as well. But there are great discussions about art, and if something's good, does it matter, the source of it? And I just really enjoyed this book. I mentioned it's a literary thriller. I think I finished this in 2 days because it reads very, very fast. So if any of this sounds appealing to you, I think this is a book I can universally recommend to people, because it's not really just pigeonholed into one thing. I mean, in many ways it's a thriller, in many ways it's a work of literary fiction. And I will say, I do not like modern mainstream fiction. That is not my thing, but I love this book. Yellowface by R.F. Kuang, I gave a 5 out of 5. My book of the month, December 2023. Hey, if you've read any of those, please let me know. I'd love to talk with you in the comment section below. Just label any spoilers if you need to. And I'd love to hear what your book of the month was in December. Did you finish the year strong? I certainly did. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. You can also find me on Twitter and Goodreads. I'd love to interact with you there. As always, thank you for watching. Until next time, goodbye.